We're going live in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, welcome to Tozen Daigaku. On today's edition of Tozen Daigaku, we have a very special guest with us today. He's the celebrated lawyer Tetsuro Kinoshita. And today, Kinoshita Sensei will be talking about 3 different systems that employers often use to change the working hours of their employees. And today, it's that thing. Yeah, can you turn that off? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Take it away, Kinoshita Sensei.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you were done. But okay, thank you, Louis, and thank you to Tozen Tokyo General Union for having me today. I do have an issue at being called celebrated, but I will try to do what I can today to hopefully help us all get a better understanding on working hours, well, wage and hour law in Japan, the exceptions to the basic rule, which I will jump into right now. So here is what I'm thinking of doing today. Just go with the flow. First, I'd like to get through the variable working hours or modified working hours, which is one of the 3 themes that I'm going to be talking about today. And then I'm going to deal with flexible working hours and then discretionary working hours. So I'm thinking of just showing some slides, explaining a little bit about the 3 systems, and then maybe we can have a few questions from Louis, or maybe from the people who are watching this on a Sunday afternoon. And then we can move on to the next themes. Okay, right. Okay, sounds good, apparently. So let me share my screen. PowerPoint slide here. And let me just turn the slideshow feature on. Yep. And I think we have it. This is good. Yep. Okay. All right, so working hours, very generic title, but I am going to be talking about the 3 exceptions to the basic rules that I just, I'm about to explain. So start with what everybody knows. So the basic rule under the Labor Standards Act of Japan is that there is a cap to the number of hours that an employee, a worker, can work every week or every day. So that's 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, and put down the articles of the relevant law, because I know that Louis loves that kind of information. So there's that. And break periods, at least 45 minutes of their break for work exceeding 6 hours, and at least 1 hour for break exceeding 8 hours. Okay, so we all know this, I would imagine. And for overtime to not be unlawful, it's punishable by law, by the Labor Standards Act, unless you have a labor management agreement in place. Why don't you have it? You can scroll through this as you like.
Okay.
Okay. And so I've just pasted the translation of the relevant article of the Labor Standards Act here. It's Article 36, paragraph 1. So a labor management agreement that deals with the number of hours of work. So an agreement that,
That's the Saburoku Kyoto.
Yeah, right. So I was just getting to that.
Sorry.
Right. So a labor management agreement agreeing to the number of hours that a worker can work beyond the 8-hour daily limit and the 40-hour weekly limit is known as a saburoku kyote, right? So that's an Article 36 labor management agreement, literally translated. So that's the second bullet point here. And if the company and a workplace have a saburoku kyote or Article 36 labor management agreement in place, that will allow for a maximum of 45 hours of overtime a month and 360 hours per year, as per paragraph 4. However, there is an exception to the exception, which allows for up to 100 hours of overtime a month, up to 6 months a year, and up to 720 hours per year permitted in ordinarily unforeseeable significant increases in the workload at the workplace. So in effect, well, this is the limit, and anything going over this is punishable by law, which was put in place after the 2018 labor reforms, which was one small step forward, in that it made a certain amount of working hours or working over a certain amount of time punishable by law, which is positive. But still, 100 hours a month is very close to the line at which the labor inspectorate does find workers who die from overwork as having worked excessively too much. So it's called the karoshi line in Japanese. So karoshi is death by overwork, literally translated. So it's still extremely high, but that is what it is today. Anyways, to move forward. So that is the basic rule. And today we're going to be talking about these 3 things. So the first will be henkei roudou jikan. Okay, so put it down in phonetically in alphabet for you people who don't read Japanese. Translated, it's modified working hours. That's the translation that JetPro goes by. So I'm going to go by this today. I do hear that it's also sometimes known as variable working hours, which sounds a lot cooler. But anyway, modified working hours. Okay. Second thing we're going to be talking about is sairyo roudou. Okay, this is discretionary working hours. Okay. And the third, okay, and it's furekusu time. Okay, or flex time. Right, so it's Japanese English. Right, so I wrote it down in this order, but the order of the slides are modified working hours, then flex time and discretionary working hours. And this is because flex time is also a form of modified working hours, but I've just put it separate from modified working hours because it's a pretty different system. Okay, so again, another slide in Japanese. This comes from the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, who are actually discussing the possibility of expanding the discretionary working hour system. We might get into a little bit of that. I don't have any slides, but we might get into that if we do have time. But I've put the link right down on the bottom right. Right. If you don't have the slides, you probably won't be able to access it, but it's there for copyright reasons. Right. So this is a chart that shows the different types of working hour systems that there are in Japan. I'm not going to translate all of it, but just for you to have an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So we have the basic rule at the top here, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. And we have the henkei roudou jikan right here. Modified working hours, right? And we have the flex time, and we're going to be skipping this one, but it's one where it deems that a worker has worked a certain number of hours, where the employer can't keep track of the number of hours worked. So salespeople working outside of the office, so people like that. And today we're going to be talking about the Senmon Gyomugata Sairyo Roudou and Kikaku Gyomugata Sairyo Roudou. So these are the 2 types of discretionary working hour systems that there are. So we're going to be talking about that today. We're not going to be talking about the Kodo Professional Seido, which is basically white collar exemption that was also introduced in the 2018 labor reforms. It allows exemption for certain types of workers. Right now, it's for people who make more than 10.75 million yen annual. and belong to a certain industry, right? So this is barely used today, which shows, well, one of the issues with the labor reforms that were carried out. We'll talk about that just a little bit later. And we have managerial people who are also exempt from wage and hour regulations. But we're going to be talking about the three topics here: Henkei Rodo Jikan, flex time, and discretionary work. And we have the tree diagram here. Is that what it's called? Here, that also gives you a better idea of, you know, where what system is located in the grand scheme of wage and hour regulations. Okay, so you can have a look at that later. So will we be sharing the slides with the viewers? I don't know, but if we can, we will.
Yeah, we can send them out.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. And of course, we'll have the Tozen Daigaku will be on the
Oh,
site.
right, okay. Good. So, modified working hours, let's see. So modified working hours allows for working hours exceeding the 8-hour per day and 40-hour per week limit, as far as or as long as the average working hours remain within the above limit during a specified time period. Okay, so this is not too accurate. It remains within the 40-hour per week limit during a specified time period. Okay. So there are three types of modified working hour systems, which is distinguished by the duration of the specified time period. So the most prominent one that we will be talking about in detail today is the first or the second bullet point here, monthly modified working hours. So this is, yeah, I think I took this from the JETRO page. So let's try reading it and see if it makes sense. Provided that provisions are drawn up prohibiting employees' working hours from exceeding 40 hours on average per week for a specified period of not more than 1 month, the employer may have employees work in excess of 40 hours in a specified week or in excess of 8 hours on a specified day. Okay. Okay. That was a mouthful, but it does kind of make sense. Basically what I just said in the first bullet point. Okay. But the period is 1 month or less. Okay. And third bullet point, annual modified working hours. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different, but more or less it's a little bit different from the monthly modified working hours. Most prominent is the duration of the specified period, right? So the period is more than 1 month, but not more than 1 year. But basically the rule is the same. The basic rule is the same. So as far as the number of hours worked does not exceed 40 hours weekly, it permits the employers to have their employees work beyond the 8-hour day or 40-hour a week limit that the Labor Standards Act provides for. And lastly, we have the week-based modified working hours, which is super rare. Employers may have employees work for more than 8 hours, but not more than 10 hours per day, provided that the working hours do not exceed 40 hours per week. And the system is limited to retailers and in restaurants with less than 30 regular employees. So we're going to be looking at a few statistics. Okay.
Yeah, I just like to confirm something. So I just want to make sure I get this straight. So if you look at the monthly version that you described, so in regular Labor Standards Act, you can't let your employee work more than 8 hours on any single day, right? Even one day, if it goes 8.5 hours without a special agreement,
Correct.
You can't do that. And you can't do more than 40 hours in 1 week, even one particular week. But in this system, you can average it out. And so then you can have like crests and troughs. And so like it can go over, but later it'll have to go under, right?
Yes.
That's basically it. Okay.
Yes.
Just make
exactly.
sure. Got it.
Exactly.
Okay,
Thank you for that. Right. So that's it. To be just a tad more accurate, so you can technically work more than 8 hours, 40 hours a week, but you need to have a
Right,
that
right,
labor management agreement, and you need to pay for that overtime.
Right.
So this modified working hour system does allow for an employer to, for example, not have to pay overtime for 10 hours if we're provided on a given day, or 45 hours if we're provided during a given week.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yep.
I've just managed to lose the share screen.
Okay.
Can you share again?
Well, it is still sharing. Maybe I can just stop sharing and try to reshare it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up there behind you though. Okay, but okay, let me try again. How's this?
Yeah, me too.
Okay, great.
We're back live.
I do like this impromptu and casual nature of this Tozen Daigaku, by the way. Anyways, I'm sorry. Another graph, I guess this time, taken from the Ministry of Labor, Health and Welfare. This shows you know, what percentage of workplaces have introduced what type of working hour system. So if you will look at the chart, well, it's one graph actually. So the blue line at the top. So this represents, okay, so yeah, this represents the monthly modified working hour system. So that's 21.5% of workplaces that have introduced that. And the pink one here is actually the annual modified system, 17.8%. I actually thought it would be a lot lower than this. My understanding was that the monthly was the most prominent and by far, but apparently it's not so much.
A percent of what? What is this percentage?
Workplaces.
So 1 out of 5 workplaces are putting these systems in?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Wow.
Yeah, it's you would prefer to have a good understanding of this.
Yeah.
I would imagine. And on the other end of the scale, very low down, we have a red line second from bottom. So this is actually the well, part of the discretionary working hour system, which provides, well, which regulates professional service workers. Okay, senmon, but it's really, really low. I'm not sure what the exact percentage point, what number of percentage points this is, but it's 0 point something or 1 point something, I think.
Yeah.
Even lower is the Hikaku Gyomu Gata, which doesn't translate well. I'll get into the English name like 30 slides down, but it's a lot less than that, so it's almost negligible right now. As I said, the government has actually attempted to try to expand the usage of these two systems. So that's something that we need to look out for, right? And also, if you'll just direct your attention to this mustard colored dot right here that my cursor is pointing at, if you can see it. So this is the high level professional working hour system that was introduced in the 2018 labor reforms. But you can see that its percentage points are 0.0. It's almost 0 as of 2020, which shows that, and it hasn't increased at all since then. From what I hear, there are only like 20 workplaces in the country that have introduced it. So it just shows how useless the system actually was, and yet they introduced. But anyways, that's another story. Just to have a good sense of, better sense of how well used the systems that we're going to be talking about today are being used, how well used they are. So just another one, flex time, it's the light yellow one, so 9.5%, so not bad. Okay, so having gotten that done into our heads, we'll move on to modified working hours. So what is this system for? Okay. It gives employers the flexibility to allocate its workforce according to its business needs, right? So just like Lewis said, there are periods when business is booming, business is very busy. There are other periods where it's not so much, right? So it gives employers the flexibility there to expand its workforce, allocate more time to the periods when it's busy compared to when it's not so busy, right? And by introducing this, it allows them to be, well, exempted in certain situations, I guess, to pay overtime where the working hours exceed 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week. On the other hand, what does this mean for the workers? It may mean longer hours in a certain time period and a less overtime premiums paid during the same period. Less stability in working hours because they're going to be super busy in a certain period, not so much in another period. Sometimes if they're too busy, it may lead to conflicts with household obligations, looking after the children, household chores and whatnot. And there is always the risk of overwork during consecrated working periods. Right. So that is something that needed to be addressed when the system was introduced, and which the law does address. So there is an ordinance or
Directive.
a directive. Okay, let's call it a directive then. There's a directive by the MHLW, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, that says more or less modified working hours are designed to address changes in the social economic context, including the market growth of the service industry, sorry, bad grammar, and to allow flexible working hours that do not compromise workers' lives, with a view to shortening working hours by allocating working hours in accordance with seasonal workload and through the creation of a flexible framework that allows labor management to work towards shortening working hours. Again, very long, but the point here is it is designed to enable the shortening of working hours when business is not so busy. Okay. So when labor unions are negotiating changes to working hour systems, to modified working hour systems, it would help to keep in mind and remind the employer that this is not a system designed just for the employer's benefit. It is supposed to be designed towards the shortening of working hours and should be therefore implemented as such. Okay. Right. Moving on to the next slide. Right, so requirements. We're going to be talking about requirements when introducing the system in a certain workplace. So you need a stipulation or provision of the following through a labor management agreement or through the rules of employment. So for the monthly modified working hour system, the employer can introduce it by way of its rules of employment or work rules, or shugyokusoku, as they're called in Japanese. Or they can alternatively come to a labor management agreement because this is a very important issue that should be addressed, should ideally be addressed through an agreement between labor and management.
That's a Roshikyote, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I'd like to make one point is that in Tozen, for some historical reasons, we call a labor management agreement the collective agreement between management and the union. I mean, this is actually correct that an actual labor management agreement is with the employee rep, but just so that know that there's some terminology practices in Tozen that don't really match what's supposed to be standard. So we're talking about a Roshikyote, meaning an agreement between management and the majority rep, which is different from a Rodo Kyoyaku, which is between management and the labor union. So.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
I don't know why we use LMA for that, but
yeah,
we
well,
did.
It sounds kind of right, at least. Yeah. I call it Rodo Kyoyaku collective bargaining agreements.
Right. That's the correct translation.
All right. And so what needs to be stipulated or provided? The modified period. So is it going to be 1 month? Is it going to be 3 weeks? Is it going to be 2 weeks? Normally it's 1 month. So we can think of it as that. So we need to specify the modified period, and we need to specify the commencement date of the calculation of said period, right? So is it going to start from the 1st of every month? Is it going to start from the 15th of every month and run to the 14th of the following month? Things like that. And we also need to, this is very important, the specification of the scheduled working days, the scheduled working hours and days off. And the total scheduled working hours are not to exceed the 40-hour per week on average, right? We're going to talk about this a little bit more later. And having come to that agreement, or having provided for that in the rules of employment or work rules or shugyokusoku, it needs to be submitted to the Labor Standards Inspection Office, which is the Roudou Kijun Kantokusho. And it needs to be notified. The contents of the rules needs to be notified to the workers as per Article 106 of the Labor Standards Act. And where the modified working hours are agreed to by a labor management agreement or same hours actually need to be provided separately in the rules of employment, actually, in order to become part of a labor contract. So this is, yeah, I think those who do know this, but just because you have a labor management agreement doesn't become part of your contract. So you need to have an individual agreement or the rules of employment in place to incorporate that agreement into your labor contract. So not too important on an individual basis, but good to know if you are a part of the leadership of the union. But again, Tozen is a very democratic union, so I guess you should all know about it. Anyway, in addition to the above, the labor management agreement under the Article 36, sorry, for Labor Standards Act is also necessary. So Sabiroku Kyote, we need that as well. So Shugyokusoku, Sabiroku Kyote, and optionally a labor management agreement with regard to the modified working hours. And so the commencement date, it needs to be specified, as I just said. So a one way to specify this would be the modified period is to be 1 month, with each month commencing on the first and ending on the last day of each calendar month. I think this would be the most simple, easily understood way to provide for this. And so the important thing here is the specification of working hours and days off, right? So the total number of scheduled working hours needs to be within the 40-hour per week on average. So if it's a 30-day month, that translates into 171.42 hours, or 171 hours and 25 minutes, I think it was. And if it's a 31-day month, it comes up to 177.14 or 177 hours and 8 minutes. And so I think this is important. All days within the specified time period need to identify the working days and the days off, and the commencement and ending times of each working day. So when you have a modified working hour system in place, and the specified time period is a month, and it runs through the first till the end of the month. Let's say you're in March, okay? The employer needs to provide beforehand what days you're going to be working in April every day. What days you're on, what days you're off, and on the days you're on, what day you're starting and what days you're on, what time you're starting and what time you're ending, right? So you can't have an ambiguous or unclear specification, right? So if there's a provision that says the employer may instruct the employee to work over XYZ hours in a given week. Let's say that's provided in the Shugyokusoku, the rules of employment. That's insufficient, and that renders the modified working hour system that the employer thinks it has introduced void, right?
Can you explain that a little bit more? I didn't quite.
Okay, right. So, okay, I think it will come up a little
Oh,
bit
okay.
later,
Okay.
but so let's say there is a clause in the or the rules of employment that says this, right?
Mhm.
So there may be months where the employer may instruct the employee to work over 170
Oh.
hours a month, okay, or more than 40 hours a week, okay? So, and the employer may claim that, well, we've introduced the modified working hour system. We have Henkei労働時間制, and that's why we can't pay you for overtime for the 45 hours you worked this week, okay? And this is the clause, have a look. And it says, yeah, it says what it says, and it does look on the surface that it might be just cause for the employer not to pay overtime for the 5 hours extra worked in that given week to that employee. But that is not the case, is what I want to say. So I hope that's a little bit clearer. We will be looking at a few other examples of clauses later on. My God, I'm sorry. 31 minutes past. We need to pick this up a little bit, but so again, there's a directive here that says provisions permitting employers to change scheduled working hours at will, but within the 40-hour per week limit are not considered valid modified working hour arrangements as well. Again, because there's not enough specificity. So you need it just enough specificity so that the worker knows what his or her schedule is going to be. What days am I working next month? What hours am I working? What days do I have off? Right? So if it's not specified to that degree, well, it's more likely than not that it's not a valid modified working hour arrangement, right? I think I have 2 slides. So the second one's a little bit redundant. So I think, yeah, I added one more bullet point and I just kind of messed it all up. So let's go to this slide. Let's go to the last bullet point here. However, it's not necessarily the case that for every single industry, for all jobs, it needs to be specified specifically in the Shugyokusoku or the rules of employment that employee A would work on a certain month on this day and such, right? It can be a little bit more general in certain circumstances. So this is what it is here. Where necessary to change work shifts by the month, such as in the public transport industry, so trains, buses, it is valid to provide in the rules of employment the possible commencement and ending times for a given working day, and what combinations of different working hours there may be in a week, the process and timeline under which the shifts are put together, and to provide workers with specific work shifts for the specified period prior to the commencement of the working month. Right, so I think this is not super easy to understand. So I will share now a PDF, which I hope might help everyone understand a little bit better. Opening it now. Here it is, and let me share this. Okay, right. So here it is. Right. So this is a redacted working schedule for a certain person. And you will see here that there are different shifts that start at different times. Right down here, you have one starting from 9:30, another one starting from 8:30, and they all end at different times depending on when they start. And there are different patterns. So this is the early shift. There's the late shift here, and there are, right, so there's the late shift here, right? And there are 2 different types of late shifts apparently, right? So you can assume that this is already provided in the rules of employment in this particular company. And when you look at the actual schedule for this particular employee, we have the different numbers that correspond to the different times at which their work commences on a given day. So we have this stipulated or provided in the rules of employment, and we have the monthly schedule provided prior to the commencement of that particular month. So in this case, there's like 6 months here, right? So I hope that makes things a little bit clearer. And getting back to the slide. Right. So let's look at a few cases that deal with the validity of certain clauses in employment rules related to the monthly modified working hours, right? So the leading case, well, one, it's not the most, right? It's, well, one of the leading cases, one of the more famous cases, the Iwate Daiichi case, which was in 2001. The company provided for monthly modified working hours, and Article 20 of the Rules of Employment said the commencement and ending times provided in the preceding article. So the preceding article provided for the modified working hours. It may be changed with working hours lengthened or shortened on a given day or week. In this event, the total working hours over a month shall not exceed 40 hours per week on average. So this is what the court said about Article 20. The purpose of the Labor Standards Act is to have employers be as specific as possible as to which days and which weeks workers have to work beyond the maximum hours provided by the Labor Standards Act. And where this is not viable, to furnish workers with rules that would allow them to predict to a certain degree their working hours on a certain day or in certain weeks. So they need visibility as to when they're going to be working in a specified time period. Right, so that is the purpose of the monthly modified work, or that is one requirement of the monthly modified working hour system. And in this case, Article 20 allows the employer to change working hours unilaterally and therefore lacks the specificity requirement for monthly modified working hours. Right, so that is how it ruled. There are issues in the labor camp that with this ruling, in that it says the company only needs to provide predictability to a certain degree, to their workers. So that in the labor camp is not enough, and there needs to be clear specificity. There needs to be clear predictability. So there's that issue, but the bottom line itself is okay. We have a few other cases that I'm going to introduce. We have the monthly the Kansai Gakuin case. This is pretty clear. The monthly modified working hours provided under the rules of employment. So there was a monthly modified working hours rule provided under the rules of employment. On the particular provision, the court said that the working hours of dormitory supervisors shall be modified working hours. Sorry, mistake. The rules of employment said the working hours of dormitory supervisors shall be modified working hours and shall be determined for each individual. So is that specific enough? No, rule of the court, which is pretty obvious given what I was explaining thus far. We have the Nihon restaurant case, another monthly modified working hour system where the specified period was 1 month, but the shifts were provided only every 2 weeks. So in this case, the employees did not know beforehand what their shift would be for the latter half of the month, the specified month, right? And the court ruled that this was invalid because they need to provide the whole month beforehand. And we have the Hirose Denki case in which the court ruled that a certain system was valid in this case. It was valid where the company provided a 1-year work calendar, which specified the working days and times of the employee. So in this case, the court ruled that this gave them enough visibility as to when they would be working, which is pretty clear. So in this case, Hirose Denki had provided to the employee what days they would be working on each day of a given year. So that was sufficient, which is again relatively straightforward. Now, I had,
Should probably
yeah.
running out of time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Try to skip a
kind
little
of.
bit. Yeah.
I had hoped to explain how overtime is calculated under the monthly modified working hour system. And I think that if you follow these two slides, you should be able to understand it. Just very briefly, never mind. I would encourage you to have another look at this, and maybe we can revisit it if we do have a little bit of time left over at the end.
It's basically time and a quarter, right?
It's
Still time and a quarter, like normal overtime, right? Okay.
Yeah, normal overtime exceeding the 40-hour weekly mark, the 8-hour
Right.
daily mark. That's a time and a quarter. But if you'll look at this slide that I'm showing right now, the gray highlighted parts are the scheduled working hours, right?
Right.
And the white parts are the hours that were worked beyond the scheduled working hours. And parts of these are time and a quarter. Parts of these are just time, or 100%, not 125% of pay.
Mhm.
And if you will look at the 31st bottom right, at the very bottom right, the cheap part here, the one right here, which is highlighted gray,
Mhm.
which is grayed out. This is 0.25 because it's already been paid for, but this is seen as overtime work because it exceeds the 177.0814 mark. But you can have a look at this slide and the following slide to try to understand this. And if you have any questions, you can ask your union rep. And I've also pasted in Japanese a model labor management agreement, or doshikyote, which I've taken from this book, which has been published by the Labor Lawyers Association of Japan, of which I happen to be a member. And it's also a good reference to have when you're dealing with working wage and hour law. Right, so a little bit truncated, a little bit cut short, but we're moving on to flex time, right? But before we do get into that, as sorry.
So just a point, with the video, we can't actually see the book that you just put up. So could you just
Okay.
if it was?
All right. I can. Oh, so you can see this,
No.
right? Because I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can cut my screen and show it on camera. It's this one right here.
Yeah.
It's also in the slides, and so you can have a look at it once you can access them. Okay. I think this is better. Yeah. All right. And getting back to it, why don't we take a few questions from Lewis if he has any before we move on to flex time.
Yeah, I think I basically understand it. It's always been a little tricky to understand about how it goes into like the average overall. And it seems like only beneficial to the employer. So maybe that's something we can discuss later about if it really does have any benefits to the employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we can talk about that now then, but if we can talk about it really briefly right now, I would say that it is beneficial in the sense that it doesn't require the employee to, stick around for 8-hour shifts, twiddling his thumbs with nothing to do when the business is, extremely it's not busy. It's not busy, right? When it's quiet, that you can provide for like 6-hour workdays or 5-hour workdays, and you can.
Although theoretically,
the
the employer could let you go home anyway, and they just still have to pay you in the current system, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they often
sure.
don't, but
I mean,
they could.
technically, yeah, you don't have any work, so you can go home. But I think that gives rise to some issues as to how am I going to be paid for the remaining 3 hours that I was scheduled to do? I need this work.
Right. I mean,
Right.
they'd still, in the normal system, they still have to pay you. If you're scheduled for 8 hours and they send you home, they still have to pay you, right?
Exactly.
If,
Right.
if the management sends you home, right?
Right. So that would
Which is
be
beneficial to the worker.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. But I do feel that that would be a bit too unbeneficial, if that is a word, to the employers, because
To the
they're
employer.
effectively paying workers for work they didn't do.
Right.
Right. So in that sense, I do feel that there is some a benefit, there is a beneficial side to employing the system. Just to ensure that it's implemented properly and it's, is I guess key. And the flexibility that it gives the employers, it sometimes gives them the false idea that it gives them, almost free hand to do whatever they want. So they're setting monthly schedules, but they're changing them once the month starts. We had
Right.
thought that we would need you this next Friday, but it turns out that we're not as busy as we thought we would be. So although we had set it for an 8-hour shift, we want to put you down to a 6-hour shift, stuff like that, right? So I'm not sure if that answers your
No, that's,
question,
yeah,
but
I understand better.
okay. So are we good to move on?
Yeah, I think we should probably.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't think it would be taking so much time. I'm just so bad at timing myself. I have also put here, should be in the slide before. Let's not talk about this. Flex time. So as the name might suggest, or as a lot of people might be more familiar with than the other systems, a working hour system that permits workers to determine the commencement and ending times of their working days within the limits of the total amount of scheduled working hours during a settlement period that is not to exceed 3 months. Again, it's a little bit long, but let's try to decipher this as we go along. Just another visual, a chart, a graph, I guess, to show you what a day for a flex time worker looks like. Right here, we have flexible hours where the worker can start working when he or she pleases. There's core time where the worker needs to be present at the workplace and providing his or her services, and we have flexible time at the end as well.
Wait, so the core time, that's the worker has no freedom,
No freedom.
but the other time they
he or she
do,
needs to be there.
but it has to add up to, like, let's say 8 hours a day or something like that. Is that right?
Has to add
Oh,
up to-
no, for
actually, it
3
doesn't.
months, it has to add
Yeah,
up.
and I think 1 month is a good settlement period to
Okay.
go by. So within the month, you need to have worked a certain amount of work that has been put in, a certain amount of work that has been agreed to by the labor
Okay.
management.
And
So if it's 170 hours, you can start, within the 3-hour window that you have here, and you can end within the 7-hour window that you have at the right hand of the chart, the graph. But when one month has passed, you tally up the number of hours that you worked. If it doesn't come to more than the 170 hours that was agreed. If yes, then the employer is responsible for paying overtime. If not, then you might be need to talk about a salary reduction, pay cuts for the amount of work that you didn't do in that month, right?
Okay. Wait, does the
Although that-
employer manage the work hours like in normal cases?
Yes.
Oh,
That
so
is-
they
that is
can't
correct.
just on their own do it. They have to report it or something like that.
Correct. So in terms of working hour, the management of working hours, it's the same as the basic rule,
Kind of.
right? It's absolutely the same, and it doesn't exempt the employer from managing the
Right,
time, the work
Right.
time worked by an employee.
Got it. That's what Tozen Union uses for its employees.
Okay, right, yeah, we were,
Yeah, flex time
I
too,
do
flex
hear
time
that
agreement.
you do have a labor management agreement
Apparently.
in place for your staff. I hope we might talk about that, but we might be short on time,
Okay,
so
sorry.
let's see.
Sorry.
Anyway, so requirements. So I've copied and pasted from a translation of the Labor Standards Act, so it's very, very long. Why don't we just read the underlined portions to just get an idea of how it's provided for. The employer may have a worker whose start and end times are left up to that worker pursuant to rules of employment, and work in excess of the work hours set forth in paragraph 1 of that article in 1 week. So that's 40-hour limit, and may have that worker work in excess of the working hours set forth in paragraph 2 of that article in 1 day. So that's the 8-hour limit that we talked about at the very beginning. So workers can decide when they start, when they end. It's a core point of flex time. And they can exceed 8 hours, they can exceed 40 hours a week as well, as long as they do not exceed the monthly or the tri-monthly limit that was set by the labor management agreement, in which case the employer would be responsible for overtime, or it would be illegal and punishable by law if they don't have a Sabadoku or Article 36 labor management agreement in place, right? And
Wait, so why does the employer want to do
Here's
this?
working.
Why does the employer want a flex time agreement?
Just for,
Oh, because it's like realistic or
Just-
something?
yeah, I mean, just, for to the benefit of the workers, that's one thing. Yeah, just give them added flexibility. I think that would be a good pitch to attract workers to the workplace. That's
Oh,
one
okay.
thing.
So it's
Yeah.
like a kind of a condition, a good
Yeah,
condition. of
and
employment.
and also by introducing the flex time system, they, as I said, will be exempt from the 8-hour, paying employees overtime for more than 8 hours worked a day.
Oh, because it's averaged out.
Yeah.
So
Again,
this, like you
averaged
said, this is kind of a type of the modified
unpaid
work
rules.
hours. Oh, okay, I
Right,
get it.
Right, so,
Because it's smoothed out over longer
Correct.
period. Got it, got it. Okay.
right, exactly.
Now I'm starting to begin to understand it.
Okay, I should hope so.
Okay.
That's the purpose of
That's
this
probably good.
Tozen Daigaku.
Okay.
Right, and just to give a little bit of information that you can refer to when you're doing some research on your own, the ordinance or order of the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare provides that the labor and management agreement needs to include the standard working hours for a working day,
Mhm.
right? Which the purpose of which we'll get into in a few slides.
For example, 8, right? Yeah,
Right, for example, 8.
Right.
And the commencement and ending times for court time where agreed. So there doesn't necessarily need to be a court time, but the employer and the workers can agree to set a few hours in a day as court time that, where the workers need to be at the workplace providing their services.
Got it.
And the same goes for flexible time where agreed. So there doesn't need to be a flexible time. So this is like a window where the workers can or need to start working, or where the workers need to stop working. If there was no flexible time, for example, in this graph here, a worker could start at like 5 a.m. if he wanted to, or he could end at 3 a.m. if he wanted to, right?
Oh, I see. Oh, so the flexible time also has to be a certain time period.
Yeah, it has to be at a certain
You
time.
can't just say whenever.
You can't just say whenever.
Oh, because it'd be 5,
But-
but that's the first non-overtime hour, right? That's why you said 5.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. I
So-
got it.
So again, you don't need to agree to have a flexible time bracket. You don't need to agree to that, but in
Then
that
it's
case,
5 to
then
10, 5 a.m. to 10
workers
p.m.
can start whenever they please, right?
Right.
So what happens? The employer needs to, keep the office open 24 hours a day,
Right.
right? That wouldn't.
And
that
then
wouldn't-
pay overtime if it's between 10 and 5.
Precisely.
Time and a quarter. Okay.
Right. Okay. Very
Got it.
good.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Now, what is a settlement period? So this is the specified time period for which the total number of working hours is specified. Right, did I?
Settlement meaning
Is it
like
right?
settle the number of hours and the pay.
Right.
Like
Right.
settling
so-
accounts kind of settlement. right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the end of the month, if the settlement period is a month, you tally up the number of hours worked and you settle the difference. If there are excessive working hours, the worker needs to be paid for it. Right, so working hours exceeding the specified working hours during the settlement period need to be paid for. And where the actual number of working hours is actually below the specified working hours, the difference has to be either made up during the following settlement period, according to this Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare slide here, graph here, or corresponding pay may be reduced. However, this does depend on, I think that this would depend on how the salary of a person is actually structured. If he or she is being paid by the hour, that might be the case, but
and then they get screwed, right?
right, but
Okay.
if the salary is monthly, normally, even if you take a day off from work, if you're sick, it doesn't necessarily mean that your pay is docked, because you got paid for the month in certain cases. Although there are instances where the employer does dock your pay.
In Tozen, most cases, the employer docks the pay, but
Okay,
yeah, but I mean, if the employer doesn't have work for you, then they still have to pay if there's a monthly
right,
guarantee, right?
because that's on them.
Okay, so in the variable system too, if there's a monthly guarantee, they can't reduce your pay because there was no work or something like that, right?
Right.
Like
right.
at school,
I mean, if
classes
if
and stuff
you're,
like
if
that, right?
you're, if
If you have a monthly
the
guarantee.
employer has, penciled you in to work 6 days on a Tuesday, no students come, and they send you home, they're still going to be responsible
To pay.
for that.
100%, right? Got it.
Yes.
Got it. If there's a monthly guarantee,
Right.
which is again why monthly guarantee is so important.
Yeah, precisely. Right, and the settlement period, it used to be before the labor reform in 2018, it used to be 1 month max. Now it's extended to 3 months maximum to allow for more flexibility. So, I have another graph here that also comes from the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. So when the settlement period used to be 1 month, which is the graph on the left side, you couldn't even it out over the course of 3 months, right? If the worker has worked in excess of the specified number of hours,
You have to pay.
this needs to be paid for, right?
Right.
And if the settlement period is extended to 3 months, then the portion that the employee worked in the first month can be transferred, I guess, in a sense, to the third month to make up for the lack of the lack of work that he or she put into that month.
So again, the reform was beneficial to the employer.
In a
As you-
sense, but on the other
Like all
hand,
those
if you
reforms.
look at the third month, before when the settlement period, the maximum was 1 month. The difference here, the lack of work put in needed to be addressed in some way, right? It might have led to salary reductions. It might have led to extra work in the following month. But if it's 3 months, then you can transfer this over here, which would render the employee not responsible for making up for that difference, right? So it works both ways, but I do see what you're trying to say there, and I do understand where the government was heading when they introduced this reform. So in that, I'm in agreement with you, right? Right. So if the settlement period is 3 months, the monthly working hours must not exceed 50 hours a week rather than 40 hours a week.
What?
So if the settlement period is 1 month, it can't exceed 40 hours a week.
In any 1 week.
Right. In any one.
In any 1 week. Okay, okay, right.
But over the 3 months, you can have a month where the average was 50 hours a week. But if it evens out over the 3 months to 40 hours a week, then that's okay.
Got it.
Right?
Oh, I see.
Okay. Right. So, right. And you can introduce the flex time system with the labor management agreement. And you don't need to submit it to the labor inspection authorities, but where the settlement period exceeds 1 month, you do need to submit it. So that's a small point, but that's how it is.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
So we talked about standard working hours, and what are they for? They are working hours used to calculate pay for paid holidays or UQ. So if you take a day off, you get paid for 8 hours if the standard working hours is set at 8 hours. And 7 hours it's paid, 7 hours worth is paid, right? Right, and normally the scheduled working hours for non-flex time workers does apply as the standard working hours. So that does happen in the majority, apparently, as it seems, of labor management agreements, right?
Okay.
So 8 hours or 7 hours, I think it's pretty standard. And the core time, so working hours where workers are required to work. I think we already talked about this, so let's skip the second bullet point. But there are some limitations to core time, so they can't be as long as standard scheduled working hours. So what would happen if we go back to this
Because
slide
it
here?
wouldn't be flex anymore, right?
Precisely,
Right.
right? It would be, yeah.
It would just be a normal thing.
Yeah, it would be a rigid, right, just a white bar here all along where the workers would be responsible for being there all the time.
Right, got it.
Right. So there's that rule. And it's also prohibited by a directive. Sorry, I'm going this way in that. To set the core time, the commencement at the time at which regular hours commence their workday, right? Because if that happens, it doesn't give the workers any freedom to decide when they come into work, right?
So you can't
And
sleep in.
Like I said, right. So like I said, a core component of the flex time system is that the workers have freedom to decide when they start and when they end.
So there wouldn't be any point if the core is
Right.
the same as
Right,
the beginning of the day.
right.
Got it.
So if it's like you can come in between 7 and 7:15, but you need to be here by 7:15 because that's the core time. Well, that's not really flexible.
Right.
Right.
I see.
And it's apparently, according to this book, it's standard to set core time around 2 hours before and after a lunch break.
Is that because everyone's there?
Your guess is actually as good as mine.
But that's not the law, that's just
It's
standard,
not the law.
right? Okay,
It just seems to be common practice,
I
right?
guess they want to have lunch together.
Maybe, or they have some meetings that they need to have everyone present at,
Right. got it.
which would probably be
In the middle of
more
the day
likely
is,
case.
right, middle of the day
Right.
is the most convenient.
Just
Got
so
it.
that everyone's there, so that everyone can be on the same page as to whatever project's going on, stuff like that, right? Now, flexible time, I think we talked about this too, but the rule again here is the second bullet point, which is that flexible time it requires a sufficient margin to allow workers' discretion. Sorry. Right, so again, flex time from 7 to 7:15 is not flex time. Okay,
Got it.
right. And how is overtime calculated in flex time? Working hours exceeding hours specified during a settlement period is subject to overtime pay. So we have an example here. A 1-month settlement period during which 150 working hours have been specified. So you can
We
start-
often use the word stipulated, it's the same, but
Okay,
just so you know that that's the word we use,
Stipulated.
yeah.
okay.
Nothing wrong with specified, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it's an agreement, so stipulated, I like it. So 150 hours, but the worker actually puts in after the end of the settlement period, when everything's been tallied up, turns out his work 200 hours in a 30-day month.
50 or
right?
Right.
So the working hours, if it was 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, it would be 171.42 hours for a 30-day work month. So the working hours exceeding 150 hours, but under that number would be subject to 100% of that worker's hourly wages.
It's honai zangyo, right?
Yeah, it's
Honai
called whole naizangyo.
Got it.
So overtime within the limitations of the law, I guess. But working hours exceeding the 171.42 mark. So that's 200 subtracted by minus 171.42 hours. So 28.58 hours would be subject to overtime premiums. So as Lewis said, wage and a quarter.
Time and a quarter.
Time and a quarter, sorry.
I don't know why we say that. but yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, that is how they say it.
Yeah, so now I really see how this part is kind of a type of modified work hours system. Like, it's a lot more clear in my mind now.
Mhm.
In the past, I kind of thought there was a completely different system, but
Mhm.
now I kind of understand, right?
Right.
And it's more like the flex time is more that the worker has more say,
Yeah,
right?
so it would see,
Where the variable is just, the normal variable is just employer decides
yeah,
what it is. Got it.
right. So this, yeah, this seems like something that might be used in lieu of other, worse working hour management systems, which we
Right.
will talk about. in
Oh,
discretionary working.
Oh, so you put this in this order in order to like increase worker freedom kind of thing?
Oh, did
Buddy.
I
Yeah,
set up the slides like this? Right, not exactly.
okay.
But now that you put it like that, I should have said yes, but anyways, just look at the slide at the very top here. Actually, no, you can just see it on my computer
Yeah.
screen here. So
Yeah.
you will see that modified working hours system is right here in the tree diagram.
Oh, right.
And
That's the
you will
ministry's
see
one,
that,
right?
yeah, the flex time working hour system is, well, in this. Well,
And
one of the branches.
and they're both Article 32,
Right,
right? Okay.
exactly. Okay.
And then discretionary is which article?
Discretionary is Article 38.
38.
38.
Okay, and that's what we're gonna do now, right?
Yeah, and yeah,
Oh, and discretionary is one of the Minashi thing. Okay, got it.
right.
Ah,
So we might get back to this slide later
Sorry.
if it might help people understand better. Problem? Sure.
Speak louder since
Yeah,
you're far away
I'm
from it,
audible on the, I can move
Yeah.
closer here. I'm off camera.
but speak loudly.
So hi everyone, I'm Jerome Ruffin, I'm an organizer here at Tozen. I have a few questions about flex time. So first of all, in the Roshikote, can you like specify, like, let's say you've got different departments or even just by different employees have different parameters of core time versus
Mhm.
flex time or the start time and end time. Can you,
Can you move
am I not audible?
quiet?
Okay.
Let me take a look at this.
Yeah,
Yeah, why don't I just set my mic over here so that, Yep.
or this is better.
Hang on, I need to wait.
Speak really loud.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, everyone. I didn't mean to take up our time with this part, but
Go ahead.
Jerome.
okay, well, I'm going to ask and then I'm sure the answer will kind of imply, but can you specify by different employees or different departments in terms
Yeah,
of flex time
like-
parameters?
Jerome's is like this, Oren is like this,
Yeah.
Valeria is like this. Can you make that kind of separate employee by employee?
yeah, in fact, you can. And you can even, it doesn't have to be department by department. It can be an individual based flex time arrangement. I mean, you could be flex time, Lewis might not be flex time. Right? So it all depends on the labor management agreement, and it is very much legal or lawful to have an agreement that addresses even one employee, for example.
Okay, my next question is, how would strikes work in the system? So
Good
typically,
question.
if you, obviously, if you strike for a full, well, actually, nothing really seems obvious to me, but there are different kinds of strikes, right? There's the all-day strike, there are strikes that start at a certain time, and then at a certain time.
We always do like time
Um,
specified
you know,
against though. We always
and-
do that.
And so obviously, if you're striking during core time, it seems like, even so, like, I don't know, how would you calculate this? And this is relevant in Tozen. One of our locals did have a strike, also had, was on flex time. And I actually don't know how the employer calculated it.
Yeah, because if you choose the time, let's say I'm gonna say, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna work 8 to 12, 10. And then you say, and I'm gonna strike it.
Right, from 10 to 12, we're gonna
Yeah.
go on strike.
Like, well,
yeah.
first of all, would it be effective? Because would they know in advance that you're gonna be choosing that time?
Well, the still sushi can happen still whenever, right?
Yeah,
But
whenever,
the ideal, for example, in this particular workplace.
Well, they
the
wouldn't pay
timing-
you for the time.
Well, let's ask, how would that work in terms of settling up?
All right, so my understanding, and I was just desperately looking for the right page on the book. The answer would be you should be paid as far as you make up for that lost time, which on another day.
But then if you make it up, the
It's not a
strike.
strike.
It's not as right,
Effective,
exactly,
right, yeah.
right.
Would you only
So-
be able to strike that core?
Yeah, that's, I think, Jerome's question.
Right,
Can
so
you strike your own flex time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my flex time is from 7 to 10 in the morning, but I'm not coming in. I'm exercising my right to strike. I think that you can
What's
do
the
that.
point?
The point is, well, you're not putting in the work during that time.
And sometimes the work is time sensitive, right? So sometimes.
Oh, you could do it before a deadline. as well.
Deadline or something.
But
like
that might cause other problems.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay.
Right.
So I guess what I would, like, the way I'm envisioning it is that your settlement time would be reduced by the amount of time in the strike, and then the pay cut would be comparable.
Yeah, that could
In
happen
that
as
way,
well.
like a normal strike.
That
Right.
would make it like a normal.
Right,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, so what's a little bit different is that, so it's super paradoxical, but you could, in theory, make up for that lost time.
Yeah.
You
I mean-
could put in an
Right.
extra hour.
I mean,
or two.
one of the problems, I think, why this is a paradox is because a strike is violating a work order to work, right? Like they say, you work tomorrow 8 to 10, and you say, no, I'm not going to, I'm striking for this demand, right? Whereas in this case, it's not a work order to work at that time.
Yeah,
That's, I think, where the confusion is coming, right? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're not violating a work order, so it's a weird kind of strike,
Mhm.
right?
Right, exactly.
This is kind of the case with Gyomi Taku strikes too, but okay.
That's something I was wondering, like, could someone on a Gyomi Taku contract work on flex time, or does the Gyomi Taku contract separate from a?
Well, you can do anything, right? When Gyomi
Right,
Taku, it's
so-
not protected by labor
So
law at
if
all.
A Gyomu Itaku Keiyaku, or a, I don't know, it never translates well, a service agreement, or,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there's
What do
all
you
kinds
call
of
it?
words. We like
Okay.
outsourcing or services provider
okay,
agreement, or I often say it's like a business to business contract.
okay, so why don't we just call it a Gyomu Itaku Keiyaku?
Yeah, we use
so
that too.
Everyone knows what we're talking about. So a Gyomu Itaku Keiyaku is at least in wording and in the eyes of the person, the other party making that contract, separate from a labor employment, well, a labor contract, right? It's separate from an employment agreement. What we've been talking about all this time is with regards to the Labor Standards Act. So wage and hour laws in relation to an employee under the Labor Standards Act. So if it was a Gyomu Itaku, as you say, and this particular person has not been misclassified as a Gyomu Itaku, meaning if he is not actually a Rodosha, a worker, an employee under the Labor Standards Act, and it's just that the employer is trying to misclassify him, make him a contractor, so that they can get out of the complying with the labor and employment laws. I would say that's a separate thing. So there's no flex time, there is no modified working hours for Gyomu Itaku. It's just what's agreed to in the Gyomu Itaku contract.
Yeah, there's no restrictions, like even 40 hours, you can go way over 40 hours on a Gyomi Taku, right?
Sure, I mean,
You could be 100 hours, it could be anything, right?
right. I mean, if you are really a Gyomu Itaku
Yeah,
contractor,
it's truly good.
right. You can work whenever you want, wherever you want.
I have two more questions.
Okay.
These should be relatively brief. So this has actually come up in the chat. And so I'll give you an example. Like imagine you have a flex time agreement. And it's really clear from that agreement that the employee is not supposed to work past 10 o'clock.
Mhm.
But
10 p.m.
10 p.m. That's
Sure.
correct.
Yeah,
Now let's say there's no Salvadoran Kyote. So
That really
therefore,
comes from the chat box,
overtime.
so.
Well, the question actually did come up in the chat box. I'm just applying it to a very specific situation that the
Okay.
executives who are having a meeting at 8 o'clock tonight should be aware of. Let's say that employee has to work past 10, even though there's no Salvadoran Kyote. Now, you've been using this beautiful expression, punishable by law. And I'm curious, what does that mean? Is like, you could be going to jail if that happens? What are we talking about here?
I will have to
But
look at
theoretically, yeah, right?
the relevant law, but theoretically, yes,
Theoretically, yeah.
it is punishable by law under the Labor Standards
It's a
Act.
crime, right?
Right, it is criminally punishable
Ifumi's in big
To-
trouble.
Okay, I hope you're listening.
to have an employee work for you beyond the 8-hour or 40-hour restrictions without a saburoku in place. So I'm gonna have to look at the law to see what exactly the punishment is, Is it a fine? Is it a sentence?
100,000 yen.
I
up
think
to
it
6
was-
months or something.
Yeah, I think it was,
Or 6
Yeah.
months hard labor, right? Yeah.
yeah, it was that. So short answer would be yes. The law would
Right up to
dictate,
Saburo Kyote, please.
the law would dictate that.
But don't forget the Japanese law also has the capital punishment still in place, so.
Yeah,
Okay,
not in labor law. but-
last question. I'm sort of joking, but sort of not. Can you use abstractions in terms of setting work hours? For example, can you say something like, the employee's work hours don't include the time when his favorite baseball team is playing?
Can you run that by me again?
Can you
Sorry.
use abstractions?
Very
when you bracket
unexpected
off the work
question.
hours? So in other words, can you say that, okay, the maximum work hours are from 10 AM to 10 PM, but do not include times when his favorite baseball team is playing?
I mean,
Like two
Technically-
right?
technically, yes.
Really?
Technically, yes.
Wait, but that would,
It's far, but I don't,
the games would have those specific hours, right?
Yeah.
what, okay, let me just try to
Because it has to be
qualify your question.
specificity, right?
Right, so are we talking about a working hours, a normal working hour system? Are we talking flex time? Are we
In
talking?
the flex time, so in flex, I'm talking about in the flex time system, I imagine the question could be applied to the others, but let me use something that might be more relevant to people. Let's say you wanted to, when a member happened to have a doctor's appointment or something.
Okay, I really like baseball.
Well, use the baseball, okay,
No.
I like that one too.
Yeah.
So let's say you don't know when you enter into the agreement, what baseball calendar it's gonna be.
Mhm.
But the employee wants to set, the employee proposes to set this out in the Kyoto show for the flex time.
Mhm.
That the baseball game, I'm not serious, everyone,
Mhm.
just curious. The baseball time, whenever it happens to be, the employee is not expected to work, so.
If both sides agree, it's okay, right?
Yeah, sure, that's the short
I
answer,
think if
yes.
both
If-
sides agree.
I mean,
it's
if
okay,
you
right?
have some flexible hours set and the baseball game is during that time,
Sure.
you don't need an additional clause to allow yourself to enjoy the game.
Yeah, because
In
if it's,
between, you
if
know,
it's flex
in that
time, it's
time.
flex. You're talking about if it's core time?
If it's court time,
court
that's the
time.
thing, that's
Okay, yeah,
another
maybe
issue.
that's it.
But as far as the employer agrees to that,
Yeah.
that's fine. I
In
mean,
effect, they're saying it's not really core.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
Right.
but again,
With some conditions on the
Yeah, just-
flexibility, right?
yeah, just one more thing. So the labor management agreement is not technically part of the labor contract, right? So as opposed to the rules of employment, for example. So I would recommend that person, in addition to having that labor and management agreement in place, to have that inserted into his individual labor contract.
I'll be
Yeah.
opening up negotiations.
Okay.
Okay, I'll let everyone get back to it. Sorry.
Okay,
to
okay.
interrupt.
There was actually one more question that expanded on Jerome's question about the punishable by law stuff.
Okay.
So the question was, if an employer is breaking these enforced by law rules, what is a safe way for the employee to report anonymously or in a way that the employee doesn't face risk of retribution for reports? So I kind of looked at the Foreign Workers Handbook and it says, like an employer shall not dismiss an employee for whistleblowing, which is Article 3 of the Whistleblower Protection Act.
Mhm. Mhm.
But like, is there anything else about of any other like damages or things that can be taken against the employee for
Legally speaking,
Yeah.
or are we talking more on the ground?
kind of legally speaking? So like, what protection does a worker have? if they
Can I try to answer?
Okay.
Yeah, you tell me if I'm wrong, of course, but
Yeah.
like, so like, if you do that and you get fired, you could sue to overturn the firing, and I think the court would not accept as a reason for your firing, well, you went to the labor standards office. You know what I mean? Is that what the question you're asking, right?
Yeah, but so what kind of protection does the employee have in general for against
You mean
expectation.
written stipulated in the law other than the whistleblowing act, right?
Yeah,
Is there something in Labor Standards Act? Says that?
Nothing very clear cut, but.
Trade union law
basically
there
just-
is.
Yeah, just.
Trade union law
Yeah,
there is.
complementing Lewis's answer, the Labor Contract Act prohibits dismissals, unreasonable dismissals or dismissals without just cause, right?
Article 16.
So you can, yeah, so Article 16, and you can say that that particular worker is protected by Article 16 of the Labor Contract Act, because as Lewis said, you can't fire someone for ratting you out
Mm.
for doing something illegal, no less.
yeah.
Right, so that would be one protection. And on the ground, I would say that you do it collectively, which I think this is, I think Lewis and everyone else here is in a better position to do that. To answer this question, but you know, if you do it on your own, you're always, you know, running the risk of putting yourself on the spot, right? Becoming the target. Whereas if you have your entire department on board, if you have the entire floor on board, that's a different story, right? And there are different ways to go about it. You don't just go to the labor inspectorate and say, we don't have a saburo kyote, right? You engage in collective bargaining. You tell them that they need to, you know, become more compliant or if you're looking to reduce your overtime, you can say, well, you can't do this. We're not working without a saburo kyote because it's illegal. And we're also not agreeing, by the way, to you know, coming to a labor management agreement. So, you know, you're stuck with, you know, just having us work for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week max, and tough on you. Although I don't think that's something that's a realistic approach that you would take, but yeah.
Well, a lot of other smaller actions maybe which fall under power harassment and other.
Yeah, there would be, a lot more minor, more subtle things. Again, you are protected by law. Obviously, the employer cannot harass you for, you know, telling them off for doing something illegal. But they will do it anyway, you know, invariably. I mean, certain employers would invariably do that. And in order to protect yourself from that, again, collective action is always the good option in my mind. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Or well, it wasn't your question, but
There was a follow-up, just on the protections against retaliation, do they also apply to non-renewals? I do know that I did explain in the chat that regardless, the renewal process makes things insecure for employees anyway, but if you know, if you have evidence that the non-renewal was directly related to, say, a report to the Labor Standards Office or something, would that be overturned in court if you sued?
okay, yeah, so
It's not Goldie Ticky.
again, more or less similar to Article 16 of the Labor Contract Act, which we talked about just now. Non-renewals where there is a reasonable expectation of renewal
Article 19
Article 19 would be, well, invalid. Well, it's not super accurate, but just for better understanding, would be invalid if it was without just cause. And is it just cause to refuse to renew someone for going to the labor inspectorate? I would say no. However, what's different from a permanent employee is whether or not that person in question does have a reasonable expectation for renewal. So, for example, if it's, you know, a first year employee and who's been told he might be renewed, but it would depend on his performance or not. And there are no guarantees that it's going to be renewed anyways. If he was told that at the outset and he was faced with the possibility of non-renewal, then another way to try to find relief would be what I had skipped and what Lewis had tried to say before, would be to rely on the unfair labor practices protections afforded under the Labor Union Act. So if we're talking about a union member, who's making an issue of the lack of a labor management agreement that would allow them to legally do overtime. And the employer dismisses that person or refuses to renew that person, regardless of whether it's his first year or not. If that constitutes a unfair labor practice, if it is done because that person is a union member, because the company doesn't like that person for being in the union, for making an issue of this as a union member, that dismissal or non-renewal may be judged to be invalid.
It's Article 7.1.
Right. And as being in contravention of Article 7.1 of the Labor Union Act. Yes, I'm done.
Okay. And then the final system.
All right, okay. Right. Just to give you a little bit more information, the penalties that we were talking about, it's not less than 6 months in prison or not less than 300,000, not more than, sorry. That's scary. Not more than 6 months in prison time or not more than 300,000 yen in fines.
And that prison time is hard labor, right?
Yes, it's hard
280,
labor.
right? Yeah.
Right.
hard labor.
Correct. Right. Okay, so moving on to our last segment here, and I will share my screen again. Right here. Let's start this slideshow. There we are. Okay.
Aren't we on discretionary?
Oh, yes, we are.
Oh,
Sorry.
there it is, yeah.
Wrong slide. So we are on discretionary working hours. Sorry. Right, so this is a deemed working hour system. I don't know if this is good English, but that's a literal translation. It's a deemed working hour system where the number of work hours worked by a worker is deemed to be a specified or stipulated number of daily hours, regardless of how many hours that worker actually provided his services for. Okay. So I'm not sure if you have a good idea of what this means. So for example, a good example would be journalists, right? So we have journalists working for the Japan Times, we have journalists working for Asahi Shimbun, right? And it seems that a lot of these journalists have a labor management agreement in place that stipulates discretionary working hours. And these journalists are extremely busy. They're extremely busy. They're almost inhumanly busy. They work like 14, 15 hours a day, easy. And I have heard that for one newspaper, the agreement under the labor management agreement for the number of hours worked, deemed to have been worked for a discretionary worker is 8 hours, right? So in this instance, a day, yeah. So in this instance, let's say that this worker worked for 15 hours, right? That would be recorded as having worked for 8 hours, right? So that is the discretionary working hour system. Yes.
So that means even whether you work 12 hours or only 4 hours is deemed as 8.
Right. So
but in reality,
it's
it's always 12, right?
And yeah, I would imagine.
This is like another thing that's good for employers, right?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm so cynical. Sorry, I'm so cynical.
Well, we are a labor union, so
yeah.
I think it's our job to be cynical a little bit. Right, so that's what it is. And it was first introduced in 1988 for a specialized work. It's called Senmon Gyoumu Gata Sairyo Roudou. So this, again, is the main type of discretionary work that is introduced in Japan, as we saw in our figures before, and which we're going to be talking about later. And it was actually expanded in the year 2000 to work in planning, drafting, researching, and analyzing in business operations. Who knows what that is, but it's in Japanese, it's Kikaku Gyoumu Gata Sairyo Roudou, right?
Is that second one like projects or something?
Not necessarily.
I don't really get
It's
the
just,
difference.
yeah, it's just basically, very essentially, it's people pretty high up in the corporate hierarchy who have a good amount of discretion to decide what sort of projects the company is going to embark on.
But they're not
And do
managerial?
Right, not managerial,
So
'cause
almost,
that's,
but not quite.
yeah,
Okay.
kind of. It's kind of hazy, but I think that would be a good image to have to try to understand what a kikaku gyomugata is. In truth, it's very hard to say what, who falls in this bracket. But we will get into a rule of thumb on how we might ascertain whether this person is a discretionary worker or not in the following slide. So if we can move on, what happens with working discretionary workers? Their working hours are subject to overtime. And actually, the submission of a Article 36 labor management agreement, where the deemed working hours is agreed, the number of hours agreed is, well, exceeds 8 hours, right? So for example, if the labor management agreement stipulates that the working hours for the discretionary workers in question are to be deemed to be 9 hours, that would mean that the company would need to pay those workers 1 hour worth of overtime, right?
But you can deem it to be 9 hours?
Yeah, by agreement. So, but I've
You
never
can
seen.
deem it to be more than the limit?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Right. Although that doesn't make too much sense.
Yeah, because
But-
it's just the amount they're gonna decide in the contract anyway, right?
Yeah, but I'm also going to turn it around one more time.
Okay.
Although it is encouraged to set the deemed number of working hours close to the number of actual working hours. So I guess if a company was to be fully compliant with that rule or that encouragement, they might set it at 9 hours, they might set it at 10 hours, but overall, it would not make a lot of sense to set that deemed number of working hours beyond the 8-hour mark.
Wait, because they'd have to pay overtime on top of what the contract rate is? But
Exactly,
of course, they could just put that contract rate lower, I think.
right, so, so basically, they can, so that's
So can I-
basically how you
Right.
formulate the contract, how you structure it.
So other than the deeming, there's no overtime pay. So if you deem it to be 8 hours,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if you work all day and all night,
Mhm.
you get no overtime. Is that correct?
Except for
Oh, 10 PM to 5.
nighttime,
I see.
nighttime overtime.
Okay. If you work, other than that, there's no overtime if the deemed hours is 8 or less, right?
Correct,
There's no overtime pay. Got it.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
correct. So that was my second bullet point there,
I
that
see.
Lewis was talking about. The employers are, however, not exempt from paying night work premiums or from keeping track of the hours worked by its employees. So it doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, and we don't care. The company needs to keep track in order to be compliant with the payment of night work premiums. So that's one thing. And they are also obligated to keep track of working hours in order to maintain the health and safety of their workforce. So if there are too many hours worked, 80 hours, 100 hours of overtime a month, the Labor Safety Act provides for the employer to have that employee have an interview with an industrial doctor to see if everything's all right. So in those two senses, it's still obligatory for the employer to keep track of the number of hours worked by discretionary workers, right?
Okay.
So what is a discretionary worker, which is my third bullet point here? This is probably one of the important things that need to be taken home today. So when you say discretionary worker, you think of a skilled person who has special expertise in a certain field, and therefore that means that instead of having his boss telling him how to do everything, he has that discretion to carry out his duties in a way he sees fit based on his professional experience. But it's not just that. The discretion here needs to be more wide-reaching, in that that person needs to have discretion as to time allocation, in the sense that he can allocate a certain amount of time to a certain task, and he's not given so much work that he's not in a position to decide to work 8 hours one day, but 10 hours the next, or maybe take the next day off if he feels his workload merits that, right? So if you're so overworked, you're doing 15 hours every single day, and you're inundated by the work that's coming your way, that does demonstrate that you're more likely than not you're less likely to be a discretionary worker. Thank you. You're less likely to be a discretionary worker in the sense that you just don't have that discretion of time, right?
Got it.
Right. So that's pretty important. So we're going to be looking at some misclassification cases down the road or down the slides. But we'll talk about that then. Anyway, so another thing that you need to be conscious of is the dangers that underlie this system, right? So due to the workers being deemed to have worked a certain number of hours, regardless of the number of actual hours worked, discretionary working hour systems carries with it the risk of being abused by employers with a view to reducing the amount of overtime payments, right? And the risk of workers being made to work excessive hours that may compromise their performance, health, and lives. So that is the biggest concern, or one of the biggest concerns with discretionary working hours. So as I said, you can work 15 hours, but the employer will only deem it to have been 8 hours, right? And although it is obligatory to keep track of the number of hours worked, if it's poorly enforced, if it's poorly implemented, and a lot of employers do mismanage this, there's going to be no record of the excessive amount of hours that the workers worked, right? So that person suffers a stroke, for example, right? And it's a work-related accident, but there's no record of the number of excessive hours worked, which makes it extremely difficult for the labor inspectorate to deem it to be a work-related accident. So these are just a couple of the issues that there are with this system, and it needs to be managed carefully. Right, and we're going into some very fine print here.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna
Maybe
go through, I'm just gonna summarize it. So I'll let you guys let everyone read through this at their luxury when they have a minute. I'm just gonna go on to the next slide. So we're talking about the professional services type of discretionary workers. So the first type and the more prominent type that I had talked about. So the requirements are that the nature of the work dictates that the manner in which the work is carried out needs to be left in large part to the discretion of the worker, right? And the second point, work that has been prescribed by order of the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare to be such that it is difficult for the employer to give specific instructions as to the manner of executing work and the allocation of time to the work. So there's a certain profile that is required for a person to be deemed a professional services discretionary worker, right?
Like you said, journalist, right?
Sorry?
Like you said, journalist is a good example.
Journalist is a good
Right,
example,
okay.
and we're actually getting into there are actually specific jobs that the Ministry of Health, the MHLW, has prescribed. So we'll get into that from now. But anyways, in addition to that, so there's a profile that needs to be met. And there needs to be a labor management agreement in place, and the agreement needs to be submitted to the Labor Standards Inspection Office. And what items need to be agreed in that labor management agreement are in the fine print here, which you can look at as you like. And so what workers are subject to this professional services category? Research and development, system engineer, journalist, editor, designer, producer, director, copywriter, system consultant, interior coordinator. Yes, I'm going to read through this. Game software creator, securities analyst, financial instrument development worker, certified accountant, lawyer, architect, patent lawyer, real property, I'm not employed, real property evaluator, tax accountant, and small and medium enterprise management consultant, and university teaching staff, right? So, however, just because your contract says that you are a system engineer, just because your contract says that you are in the research and development department of a certain company, does not mean that you are automatically a discretionary worker. And that is regardless of whether there is a labor management agreement in place that allows for the introduction of this category. It needs to be discretionary in substance. So going back a couple slides, we had talked about in what manner the work needs to be discretionary, right?
Mhm.
And just to give a few examples, yeah. And I think we can conclude with this portion and move into Q&A.
Yeah.
The ADD case, 2011. So there's one lawyer in Kyoto, is called Takuya Shiomi, who does dozens of these cases. Okay, it's one of his main focuses, right? So he actually a lot of these cases he did. And so the ADD case, so the worker was a system engineer, but the court ruled that the discretionary work hour rules do not apply to him. So therefore, he comes under the regulation of the basic regulation of the Labor Standards Act, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So what did they consider? They took into account that the client to whom the worker was providing his services had set extremely tight deadlines. So we have a client, we have the contractor who is also the employer of the worker in question, right? So the client gives a lot of projects, a lot of work to the contractor, who in turn instructs the worker to work on that, those tasks, right? So they're extremely tight deadlines. So a lot of work, no discretion as to time allocation is the direction that this ruling is going in. And also that the employer had given the worker a substantial amount of programming tasks outside of the scope of system engineering. So programming is not the same as system engineering. So they're giving him work that is not supposed to be subject to discretionary working hours, right? And the worker was also carrying out sales tasks. So same thing, doing a host of different things without a lot of discretion as to time allocation, and also doing other work that is not subject to discretionary working hours in the first place. So thereby ruling that he's been, I guess, effectively misclassified, although they don't use that wording a lot in this context, but I think it's apt in this situation. Next slide, we have the Otsuyama Saishiki Kobo case, also Kyoto. So also Mr. Shiomi worked on this. The plaintiffs worked 120 hours of overtime for 160,000. I think this is a base salary monthly. So they were not paid for this overtime because the company said that they're discretionary workers. So the plaintiffs were treated by the company as discretionary designers, which was in there, the order of the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare, but their work was ruled to be not more than drawing up sketches based on an already established design and also manufacturing. So, so that is not designer work under the definition of the MHLW order. I wasn't able to put it into my slides, but there are ordinance directives that do explain a little bit more what a designer needs to be doing in order to be a discretionary worker. So I will encourage you, or those of you who are interested, to try to look for that. So in this case, they are designers, but basically they're not doing very creative work, right? They're doing like secondary work that comes from the design work that was actually done. So not very discretionary, not a lot of room to decide how to do their work and when to do their work by, how much time they're going to allocate to each task. So also another logical conclusion. There are not a host of legal precedents or case law that deal with these types. This is because, well, there's a host of reasons. The discretionary workers don't understand what being a discretionary worker actually means in a lot of cases. And therefore, they don't realize that they're being put in a, you know, they're being made to hold the wrong end of the stick, so to speak. So a lot of these cases are probably dormant. They remain silent. The potential plaintiffs, the potential workers who do have a case remain silent. But despite that, there are some other cases that have come to light and have come up in newspapers and TV programs, stuff like that. So there was a, this is one. There was a worker who was treated as a discretionary worker doing research and development. He was 1.5 years out of college when he was made to do this work, right? But his actual work also involved creating sketches, and he developed mental conditions due to the long work hours that occurred after application of discretionary status, right? So what happened here was that he was shifted to discretionary work, and what happened? The number of working hours he had to do suddenly spiked, and that made him sick, right? Another case. So this case, I think, is being the first one is probably being litigated also by Shiomi-san. Another case: a worker treated as a system consultant on account of using a computer in his line of work. But his main work actually involved sales, product sales. So nothing to do with system consulting, apparently. Yeah. Another case: treated as discretionary for doing research and development and system consulting. The work that was specified in his contract was all work pertaining to adjoining facilities, whatever that means. And he was disciplined for taking frequent breaks. So what does that say about the discretionary nature of his work? If you are a discretionary worker, you can take a break whenever you like, as long as you get the job done, right? So that is no grounds for being disciplined. So that shows just how, I guess, disingenuous the company is in deeming him to be a discretionary worker, classifying him as a discretionary worker, and disciplining him for taking time off, right? Other cases, these are the ones that have come up in the paper, I think. A worker treated as a game software creator by a company called Cyber Inc. I'm not sure if I'm spelling that right, but he actually worked in communications, so PR, and the holding of gaming events, right? So that's not a software creator. That's not what a software creator would do. Another worker treated as an editor by a monthly periodical called Days Japan, but the pay was 190,000 Japanese yen with 140 hours of overtime. So the issue here is not the amount of overtime, but it's not written here, but you can just imagine how undiscretionary the work is just by looking at his or her pay here. 190,000 Japanese yen. That is not the kind of work that is done by a discretionary worker that has the discretion to do the work in a way he pleases, using the time he pleases, right? Last one, treated as a producer by a management agency. So it's like a Geno Jimusho, Cube. But he did odd chores for artists. He sold merchandise, and he was instructed by his boss on what to do and when to do it. So, producer, so a discretionary in the discretionary worker category as prescribed by the MHLW, but in reality, so in reality, what he did was not producing. It was just, just basic run-of-the-mill blue collar type work, which does not qualify him as a discretionary worker and make him exempt or make the employer exempt from wage and hour regulations. So there we are. We have seen the instances, the actual cases or instances or on the ground of how discretionary work is being abused by employers to get out of paying overtime and to make their workers work for extreme amounts of time. So this is a large issue. You need to focus very strongly on whether this person is discretionary or not. If there is a company, or if your workplace is trying to introduce this, you want to be very careful to gauge whether the type of workers involved are actually discretionary workers as provided by law. And of course, you need a labor and management agreement to introduce this. And so it is down to the workers or the labor unions to ensure that this system is not abused by the employer. And right, that is about all I have prepared today. We are an hour and 50 minutes in, so I think it's a good time to wrap up and get into some Q&A, maybe. Okay.
Warren, do we have any questions?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So one question, an employee is paid both a base salary and a fixed amount for discretionary work and works a total of 220 hours, 160 hours scheduled and 60 hours overtime, and did not get overtime payments. Is that legal?
Okay. You said discretionary worker, right?
So this seems to be someone who, I think, Lewis, you might know more about this.
Really?
Okay.
Wait, it's a discretionary contract?
If it's a discretionary worker,
I'm not sure.
okay. Okay, let's
Huh?
pose, okay, let me try to answer it first. And maybe Lewis, you can add some comments.
Yeah.
Or.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I don't
important
know.
that the employee understands, is management claiming that it's a discretionary work hour system? So that's the first thing, right?
Right, so if it is actually a discretionary work hour system, you wouldn't have a 160-hour cap or agreement on the number of hours worked. You would have the number of hours deemed to have been worked daily. So that might translate into 8 hours a day, 20-day work month,
Right.
which would be 160 hours. But leaving that point aside, so as I said, discretionary work does not require, if it is discretionary work, it does not require overtime pay. Just nighttime premiums, right? So if their nighttime premiums are unpaid, they need to pay that. But beyond that, the 220-hour work hours, it does not translate into overtime payments or overtime premiums for that worker. However, ideally, the 60 hours of overtime done is offset by the allowance that is paid under the labor management agreement to these discretionary workers for the work that they do. So if the worker in question is really a discretionary worker, that would be the answer. If he is just being misclassified, that is a whole other story. He would be subject to the regular regulations of the labor and employment laws, the Labor Standards Act. So if he's doing 220 hours overtime when his scheduled work hours is 160 hours, he should be paid for I would say around 17 to 18 hours of overtime, plus the remaining 42 hours of overtime premiums. Right, so I think that in a work month, if a worker works 8 hours a day, 170 something hours is 法内残業, 法内労働, right? 法定労働時間. Therefore, up to that mark, he's going to be paid 100% of his hourly salary, but beyond that is going to be paid time and a quarter.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, I hope that wasn't too complicated.
yeah, like you said, they are a discretionary worker, so it should be.
Oh.
Okay,
It,
so that comes down to whether he is discretionary. What type of work does he do?
Yeah,
Right, what sort of discretion does he have? Does he have too much work that he can control, his working hours? Does he take instructions from his boss? Stuff like that.
yeah, it says, it's just that the work tracking software indicates that there is like 60 hours of overtime. Essentially.
Okay. Right, so that, I think that relates to the obligation of the employer to track the number of hours worked by that employee.
Another question, not so much maybe discretionary worker, but they are a or professor in a university full time. And they say a lot of work is off campus or even on weekends. Recently, there is a new rule demanding that all faculty use a punch clock similar to administrators. It was strongly disliked, but now all are being told to use it. And I suspect it will be used against professors who are disliked. The policy started a while ago and will be active this semester. Is there anything I should be cautious of, or anything I should prepare or take note of for protection of myself or even others?
Thank you for that question. I would prefer to have a bit more detail, but if the worker in question, the professor in question, is a discretionary worker, it's a tough one either way, because by requiring a punch clock, it's basically for the employer would be carrying out its obligation, observing its obligation to keep track of the number of hours worked by the employees so that they can protect them from being overworked, right? That would be the presentation anyways. And if they're not, again, it would be a way for the employers to manage the working hours of its staff so that they can adequately calculate overtime or their salary, right? So it's kind of difficult to get out of it to actually oppose the new policy by the university, which on the face of it does appear that they're trying to be compliant with the law. If there's anything to be wary of, it's a tough one. I don't think it's really easy for me to say that, you don't need to punch in and punch out. The company, the school will probably expect you to. So I don't know. It's a tough question. I don't have a good answer to it actually, but I will think about it.
one thing, if it's discretionary, the employer must tell the workers that they're on a discretionary system, right?
Yes.
But that's like really.
There needs to be an agreement there and it needs to be notified. So this person should know whether he or she is discretionary or not. But if it is discretionary, there is really no reason for the employer to use the time at which that employee punched in or punched out against him or her, because it's discretionary. So what, you didn't punch in, you didn't work at all this day. What were you doing? That's my business, And you can't deduct his or her pay for not working a sufficient number of hours, because that's what discretionary work is all about. So I don't think there's a lot to work, too much to worry about there. And again, if you are not a discretionary worker, I would imagine that you would want to have the number of work hours reported, so that the school is held accountable where it should be. So not sure there. I guess it depends on how vindictive the school might be, and it might have something up its sleeve. It might be thinking of something, right? It might try to target specific staff for the number of hours worked. I don't know, but that's really hypothetical. So maybe if you can give me a bit more detail, you're welcome to come in for a consult if you like, and maybe we can talk about it further.
Yeah.
But I think this is the best answer that I have today.
Yeah, they don't really have any further information other than.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Last question, we don't have anything further in the chat. What can a employee do if the employer is putting all of the work of recording and requesting overtime pay on the employee? So the company kind of keeps record of all hours, but they say, oh, if you want overtime, you have to claim for it yourself. We won't sort it out for you.
Is that actually happened?
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Well, I think it's full of, yeah, I think it's,
Can you guess what I'm talking about?
No,
Which company do we have the most problems with?
you, yeah, yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
well, I think it's full of nonsense. It's full of nonsense. I mean, we're live streaming, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I mean, that's pretty novel for me.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a million companies who just don't pay overtime and don't say anything about it.
Yeah.
It's actually the first time where I've heard someone say, we will pay overtime, but you need to manage your work hours and you need to bring the claim, otherwise we're not paying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Contractually speaking, under the Labor Standards Act, that's ridiculous, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of cases where the worker in effect has to work overtime, but management purposely doesn't manage those hours and says do it within the time allotted, even though it's impossible, right?
Mhm.
And that you have to ask for permission before you do overtime. So we have a lot of employers like that.
Right, so that's very twisted, but not uncommon. Normally, the legal argument would be the workload was such that it didn't permit for the employee to work within the allotted time frame. And
That's usually what we
yeah,
say.
that does fly, as long as we can prove it.
Jerome, do you have any questions? Nothing about baseball or?
No, draw my baseball question.
Baseball players are Gilmy Tucker, that's one problem, but they strike.
That's another interesting story there.
Right.
Okay.
The question came in.
Topic comments. Someone says they saw a picture of you with Tozen members like a long time ago,
Really?
and you look exactly the same. Do you have a youth potion?
Yeah, he never ages, yeah. Kinoshita says he never ages. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you're sensitive about that or
That's a
anything.
very good question. It's a very good question. But I'm not gonna give it online.
Me too, right? I look the same as when I was in my 20s, right?
So moving on. Do we have any final questions? In here? Okay. Yeah, so, Lewis, you want to round us off?
Yeah, okay, so thank you so much, Attorney Kinoshita Tetsuro. We are working with Kinoshita Sensei in a case, and I'm sure we'll have many in the future. And just want to thank you for making this much easier to understand for me, and I'm sure a lot of others. And we hope to see you again. So, and we'll put all this online, of course, with all the, and also the slide, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we can put the slide as a separate thing.
Yes.
Thank you
Had
so much.
fun. I had fun as usual, as I always do with you guys. So thank you.
What?
One final question.
Okay.
Is it related
Uh,
to?
Shakai Hoken.
Ah,
For Shakai Hoken, if our work drops below 20 hours
Mhm.
for a week, then goes above.
Oh, God. Okay,
3 month thing, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
It-
so maybe if it's a fluctuate.
Well, if it's 3 months in a row, it changes status, right? Right?
Yeah,
So like if you're not in Shakokan, you're not eligible, but for 3 months you are eligible, then it switches. And then if you're eligible, and then 3 months in a row below 20 hours, then it switches. Is that correct?
So it needs to be like above for the quarter, and if it goes below for a quarter, it kind of cuts off a bit, and then above.
Well, it
the quarter-
stays at whatever status it was. If
Okay.
it goes back and forth, it just stays whatever it was. But then 3 months in a row at the other status, then it switches. Is that correct?
Wait, so if it's like
Um,
2 quarters,
Quarters? A quarter of a year?
Yeah.
Oh, 1 quarter. If it's 3 months in a row
yeah,
below 20,
then it switches.
then it switches and you're out, right?
Yeah, but then if it goes back up for the next quarter.
For the whole quarter, all 3
Yeah.
months, right?
Mhm.
It's gotta be 3 months in a row.
Oh, okay, so it has to be that. Sorry.
No. It's good because I'm not sure of the accurate answer. Off the top of my head, I feel that Lewis is correct. So, right, the social insurance authorities do look at it on a quarterly basis. You might be interested to know that they decide on the amount of the insurance premiums to be paid based on your salary from May through July, so that's 3 months.
Oh.
So
Isn't
from
it
that,
April to June? Is it May to July?
I think it's May,
Oh,
July.
okay.
I would tend to say that Lewis is correct. It's just that I don't have the accurate information, so I'm not sure if I should answer that question. But off the top of my head, I think what Lewis is saying is correct. But if you need me to have another look, I will do, and I will try to get back to you in some way.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, so.
I was kind of anticlimactic, but
Yeah, we need to think of our next Tozen Daigaku.
Oh, yeah.
I am still working on one on labor history
Yeah.
or post-war, which will possibly be the next one or later on.
That'd be really exciting, yeah. I want to like about the new system of the Rodosha Kyodo Kumiai. It's like a workers co-op
mhm.
law. It's like a new law, and it sounds really good. Like the workers kind of control, they own the company, like a workers co-op. But I'm sure there's a catch that
Yeah,
I just haven't caught yet. So I'd like to, at some point, one of us do a thing on that and say what the catch is and why it's probably really bad.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
that'll be one of our next ones as well. Okay,
And remind everyone, we have a lot of Tozen Daigaku on the site. There might be some you're interested, so it's under tozenunion.org and then under media. If you look, and then Tozen Daigaku, and there's a whole bunch, and some of them are really exciting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you
Yeah.
next time.
Bye.
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 Bye.